Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Migraine Mentors minicast. We are your hosts, the Migraine Mentors, and we are very excited to bring this topic of discussion today. First and foremost, my name is Dr. Erik Reis. I'm one of the Migraine Mentors, and I'm here with my brilliant business partner, Dr. Thompson Maesaka. Dr. Maesaka, how are you today?
Doing all right, man. Cold and wet. I don't know if you live in Minnesota or not, but it is incredibly stormy, which is actually a great transition. That's what we're talking about today. Weather, pressure systems, why they trigger migraines, and what to do about them.
This is an interesting topic because I think as a provider, we're really aware of how the weather and how weather patterns affect a lot of people. And it's not just migraine, they affect concussion cases, they affect people with digestive issues. You always hear the old wives' tale of people having like inflammation and arthritis, and they can tell you like when a storm's coming in because they feel it in their knees or their hands. But this is something that is really interesting based off the fact that there are so many reasons for how the weather affects people with migraine. So Dr. Mayasak and I were talking about this before we started recording, and he has a really good kind of process of thinking on this and a really good analogy to kind of bring to the forefront. So Thompson, why don't you go ahead and just kind of tell people a little bit about the stress bucket and how that component can really be effective for helping people manage their symptoms when weather comes in.
Yeah, totally. So this has been a thorn in my side and all of my patients' side for as long as I've been in practice. This is the one thing don't really seem to have a deliberate strategy to avoid or prevent or treat as it comes. It's just sort of part of the constellation of struggles with migraine. That being said, it's not completely lost. The analogy Dr. Reese was talking about is something that we use in our clinic all the time. It's called the bucket analogy. If you've been listening for a while, you probably have heard it. It's always a good refresher because it totally gives you a roadmap of everything that you have control over and everything you can do. So essentially, everyone has a bucket. Every human, even if you don't have migraines, has a bucket. When the bucket overflows, usually something bad happens. When mine overflows, I either get an ocular migraine or I get sick. Concussion patients, their bucket overflows. They have to sit down, take a nap, and just sleep it off. Migraine person has the bucket overflow, they get migraine, so forth. Everyone has a different consequence, if you will. So the bucket is an analogy for your autonomic nervous system and its capacity to metabolize stress, essentially. So not so much how resilient you are to stress, but how your adrenal system can produce cortisol and other stress hormones and how well your body can clear it. So if that system is overwhelmed, the bucket's going to be very small, or it's going to be like 90% full already. And so typically the analogy goes, we need to figure out if your issue is a bucket problem. So is your bucket already full or is it just very small? Or do you have faucets that drip water into the bucket, of which are your neck, your hormones, your food, the way your eyes and your vestibular system and your neck all communicate together? It's called central vestibular care. We do a lot of that in the clinic. So we need to figure out, is one of these buckets or is it the bucket or one of the faucets? And so the example I always use is I had a patient at my first clinic who had terrible migraines, and the one thing he did a ton of stuff right, not everything right. He was a little lax with the food, but couldn't get the storms to not trigger a migraine. So his solution, despite my efforts to help him understand the bucket, was to move to Santa Barbara, where there are no storms. So while that is a viable option for him, the rest of you can use the bucket analogy to kind of serve as a roadmap. So ideally what we want to do is work on all the other things that we have control over so that when the storms do come through, you have enough space in the bucket to not have it overflowing and give you a migraine.
I think we should just start writing scripts for people just to move to Santa Barbara. And maybe that's like where we're missing out, and we should just, become more effective in that category. That analogy works so well for so many reasons. And I think a lot of people, when they understand it more, it really hits home for them, right? I think a lot of people just feel that intuitively. And this is one of the hardest parts about weather affecting patients and symptoms, is that we'll never be able to control that, right? We'll never be able to control whether there's a good day or a bad day. Especially living in Minnesota, like freezing cold winters are inherently inevitable. There's nothing that we can do about that. But there are things that we can do. And as Dr. Maesaka alluded to, it comes down to a lot of the things that we've talked about previously. It comes down to making sure that your diet is on point. If you're somebody who struggles with histamine intolerances, or maybe you have like gluten and dairy sensitivities, those things really do matter. Because as you know, inflammation is a massive factor in migraine and migraine-based symptoms. getting good sleep. Sleep is inevitably going to be something that will always affect you. There's a reason you sleep a third of your life away. Sleep allows your brain to take out the day's trash. It allows you to restore energy, upregulate mitochondrial and cellular processes for healing. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. More importantly, too, getting physical exercise, that will always be a staple for you. Now, not too much, but not too little, right? There's kind of a Goldilocks sweet spot for people, especially with the migraine community. Too much can be a bad thing, and then too little, of course, can be a bad thing. Then on top of that as well, the stress bucket analogy is all about like managing stressors, right? So it's not just feeling stressed emotionally, it's all of these other things that we just alluded to. So that's a really big deal. And if you're somebody who knows they need to take a nap when a storm comes in, do it. If you're somebody who knows that when it gets cold outside, you need to bundle up and stay warm, do it, right? Like these are things that we won't always know as doctors, but we can advise you on, we can give you feedback on. So those are really important aspects. And Thompson, I'm curious to hear if there's anything else that you have seen clinically with patients or tried with patients when they are sensitive to just different environmental factors. If there's anything that you can add for more value on that.
Yeah, I've had pretty decent luck, not great luck, but I would say probably a third of patients respond really well to this technique called zoke, or insufflation is the technical term. It's a little called the ear plunger. So essentially it works for general migraines well because it deflects the eardrum, and part of what plugs into the eardrum is the vagal system. It's why it's sort of in that big bucket of vagal therapies. But it also has a way of pressurizing and neutralizing the pressure in the middle ear, which is where a lot of the pressure sensitivities with those big storm systems will affect. So that's been decently effective. Sinus drainage, just to make sure that your sinus cavities in general are very connected to something called the trigeminal system, which has everything to do with head and face pain. So jaw issues are also a huge contributor into the trigeminal system, plugged into the same nerve. So TMJ work and issues with sinus drainage, specifically eating really clean and really following the histamine diet, the period leading up to the storm has been decently helpful. Honestly, another huge shift we talk about a lot in the early episodes that I think it really, really hits home specific to this topic is the two things that make events really stressful, regardless of migraine or not, are sense of total randomness, like when a family death hits you out of nowhere and you weren't expecting it. That aspect of it makes it crazy stressful. And a sense that you don't have control over it is also very stressful. And so I would argue, and consistently argue, that migraine is one of the most stressful conditions in the world, because sometimes they seem pretty random. Like you don't know when they're going to happen. And a lot of times, especially if you're over relying on medication, you don't feel like you have any control, because you're like, God, I hope the medication this guy gave me works. I don't really have any other tools. So that's what I love about the alternative side of migraine, is one of the things that can inherently raise your threshold and lower the water in the bucket, just to feel like the things you have to control them are things that you can do. They're just things that are available to you. I think that's hugely important. That's a huge concept to grasp in this whole idea of lowering the water in the bucket, is if you feel autonomous, if you feel like you have the control, and the things you're doing to lower the migraine frequency are things that you're doing. They're not pills someone else is giving you. I think that's huge. I think that's a huge message to take away here, is the more things that you can accumulate in that toolbox, the more sense of control you have, and thus the lower perception of stress. And that's huge. Perception is reality, especially with migraine, and choosing ways to manage your stress. So if you're listening, one or two things might not hit the home run like some medications you've heard of, but if you stack enough of these things and learn how to control them through your own actions, that's literally the only reason we're doing this newsletter and this podcast, is to help empower you to take control of this terrible condition.
Yeah, and in that situation, knowledge is power. And I think that that's a phenomenal place for us to stop too. So for those of you who are subscribers to the Migraine Mentors newsletter, thank you for your enduring support. As you saw, last week's newsletter was completely inspired by one of the subscribers that we have in Germany, who reached out and told us about her issues with being iron deficient anemic and seeing significant shifts in her migraine symptoms after treating that. So that's huge, and we love the feedback. So thank you for supporting us. We can't thank you enough for that. We love hearing from you. As we've told you before, and we've shown, we read all the emails and all the messages that you send us. For those of you who aren't subscribers to the newsletter, what are you waiting for, right? We are the Migraine Mentors. We are here to send you and give you information on integrative, non-pharmacological ways to help you structurally, neurologically, mentally, emotionally, and all the things, trying to just help you live your life to the fullest and help you overcome your migraine symptoms. So if you want to subscribe, there's a link down in the description below on the YouTube channel, and we look forward to seeing you at next week's episode. Until then, we'll see you soon.